Good morning, everyone, and welcome to your morning report for Monday, the 9th of March, 2026. Let's get started on our executive summary. If you could come on, Jared. Inside the Beltway, the Trump administration is implementing a war risk reinsurance plan to get traffic moving through the Strait of Hormuz. And on the domestic side, there was an attempted bombing at a New York City protest on Saturday near the mayor's residence that may have a nexus to terrorism. The FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force is investigating. And the Democratic National Committee is in a state of panic over fundraising shortfalls ahead of the 2026 election, and donors appear to be placing the blame on DNC Chair Ken Martin. Go ahead, Jared.
All right. Sorry, my connection stuttered there for a second. So the U.S. and Iran war continues. There is an additional carrier strike group preparing to deploy there. We'll get into that. And the Ayatollah's successor has been chosen. The U.S. also established a military coalition with 17 Latin American nations to eradicate the cartels over the weekend.
And looking forward, the Trump administration is trying to implement this war risk reinsurance plan through the Development Finance Corporation, but that may not be enough to instill confidence in ship security in the Strait of Hormuz. The traffic is still effectively at a standstill, and the longer this goes on, the stronger the domestic energy price impacts are likely to be. All right, let's move on to inside the Beltway. So the Trump administration announced this reinsurance program over the weekend, and it's going to be a $20 billion rolling coverage for tankers and other cargo ships transiting the Strait of Hormuz. It's also going to be managed by the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, and the DFC said it is working with U.S. Central Command to implement this plan. The CEO of the Development Finance Corporation, Ben Black, said that they are confident the reinsurance program will get tankers and cargo moving through the strait. As far as I've been monitoring the situation over at the Maritime Twitter, and right now the Strait of Hormuz effectively remains closed due to these increasing marine war risk insurance premiums, and there have been Iranian strikes on commercial vessels. Maritime analysts say that the increasing daily rates for commercial shipping will motivate some to continue running the strait despite the risk. This reinsurance plan, though, like I said earlier, may not be enough to completely reopen traffic in the strait, and the longer this disruption lasts, the more impact the strait closure will have on domestic energy prices. As of this morning, both WTI and Brent crude are trading over $100 a barrel. The Trump administration, as far as I can tell, there are no indicators they are going to slow down military operations against Iran for now, despite the impact of energy prices. Which we will talk about later when the Trump administration announced that they're rebuilding high-end munition stocks. But there's still talk about U.S. Navy escorts for the strait, and there does seem to be the Trump administration does seem to be pushing that as well. I think their focus is on getting the flow through the strait reopened and keeping that energy flowing while maintaining strikes against Iran. Moving over to Congress, President Donald Trump said that he will not sign any new bills passed by Congress into law until Senate Republicans pass the Save America Act. On the other side, Senator Chris Murphy called on Democrats to also block or delay all legislation until Congress votes on a declaration of war against Iran. So this seems to be setting up even more disruption over at Congress, and I think has a risk of more Americans seeing Congress as ineffective. And then finally, President Donald Trump said that inside the Beltway, President Donald Trump said the largest U.S. defense manufacturers agreed to quadruple production of advanced weapons after a meeting at the White House on Friday. Both Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, now known as RTX, said that they agreed to increase production of these advanced munitions under an agreement reached with the Department of Defense months ago. There has been, I did see an interesting analysis that the market for advanced munitions has actually grown by just over 50% between 2024 and 2025. So there has been movement from the defense contractors over the last year to increase production. At least it appears to be. And I think the pressure campaign from the Trump administration on defense contractors may be working to get them to focus on rebuilding munition stocks. All right, moving over to the domestic side, the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force is launching a terrorism investigation after 18-year-old Amir Balat and 19-year-old Ibrahim Qayyumi threw two improvised explosive devices at protesters in front of the New York City mayor's residence on Saturday. New York Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch confirmed that these were not hoax explosives or smoke bombs, And two sources that spoke to CBS said that the explosive devices contained triacetone triperoxide. There was also another suspicious device found in a vehicle 3 blocks from the mayor's residence on Sunday. The fact that these explosives contained TATP is interesting because it is simple to manufacture, but it is a very volatile homemade explosive and it's prone to accidental detonation. To me, this points to it being likely that these two men had some assistance from someone with chemistry education and knowledge. They also both traveled to the Middle East. I believe Balat traveled to Turkey in 2025, and Kayumi traveled to Turkey and then Saudi Arabia in 2024. And this fits similar profile, similar pattern to other recent radical Islamist terror acts like the New Orleans New Year's Eve attack in 2025. I think self-radicalized terror actors remain a more likely domestic terrorist threat than large-scale coordinated terrorist actions. And part of that is also the increased access that radicalized people had to the United States during the Biden administration. And on top of that, younger people are becoming more politically radical than in the past. Political radicalization is increasing among younger people in the United States. So I do think there's an increased risk of this type of activity going forward, because we've already seen multiple self-radicalized acts of violence in the United States in the last year. Over at the DNC, Axios spoke to more than 24 Democrats that said the Democratic National Committee Chair Ken Martin is facing a growing crisis of confidence within the party. And some of the sources they spoke to said the DNC has been in a state of near insolvency after the 2024 election, and the DNC is even considering layoffs due to debt. They've had to take out they currently have $15 million on hand and have a debt of almost $20 million remaining from the Harris campaign, and had to take out a loan to cover their bills. Some of these sources also said there's an internal frustration over Martin's reliance on political allies from Minnesota, and they're referring to them as the Minnesota Mafia. I think this is likely an attempt to oust Ken Martin by the centrist faction of the Democratic Party, because the Democrat Party is in trouble on the fundraising front. They've been significantly outraised by Republicans ahead of the 2026 midterm. The base case, I think, remains that Democrats flip the House in 2026. But this has longer-term implications, and the fight between the centrist and progressive and democratic social swings of the party over the DNC appears to be a central cause of this fundraising disruption. A lot of the donor class are withholding funds from the DNC over their disagreements with Ken Martin, and also they don't like that he didn't release the 2024 post-mortem. And I think they could be facing major headwinds in the 2020 election if this continues, because there's been a fight between these two wings of the Democratic Party over the Democrat political infrastructure. And right now, the progressive and democratic social swing of the party appears to be winning over control over the DNC. And as we reported previously, they have been pushing to change the primary rules in 2028 to allow a more progressive or even democratic socialist candidate to have a greater chance at winning the Democrat primary in 2028. And so I think this fight is going to continue. And this public release of this disagreement, this loss of confidence, is an attempt by, I think, the centrist faction to strike against the democratic socialist and progressive wings of the party, who have had a major advantage in taking control of that political infrastructure. And finally, over in Arizona, the Department of Homeland Security said that a warehouse that was recently purchased as part of the ICE mega detention center plan in Surprise, Arizona, was targeted in an arson attack on the 21st of February. DHS said an individual broke a window, ignited a fire, and threw a propane tank into the building, but the automatic sprinkler system ended the fire. The anti-ICE organized resistance has successfully disrupted some of these warehouse sales that we've talked about over the past months. And the anti-ICE organized resistance has a robust intelligence collection and dissemination apparatus, and is tracking the attempts by the Trump administration to build out this immigration enforcement infrastructure. The attempts to build a 737 fleet to get around having to use charter planes. This attempt to centralize detainee operations in this mega detention center plan. And they are doing this with the assistance of resistance-friendly media. Wired Magazine's an example. They've been posting a lot of the locations for these warehouse sales, the locations of charter flights. They've republished the zines and guides to building out the rapid response infrastructure and these different TTPs that the organized resistance is using. And they've also had assistance from leaks from federal agency insiders. Ken Klippenstein's one example, who he has very credible sources within DHS that have provided operational details for the federal surges and the different plans to implement deportation operations. I think we're likely to see more of these warehouses that have been successfully purchased be targeted by far left actors. And the idea is to disrupt this mega detention center plan. And as we covered in Chicago, the far left, they moved to a strategy of disrupting strategic choke points for deportation operations. And that is the risk of the mega detention center plan, is that rather than having a more widespread detainee footprint, a detention footprint, and this is going to centralize detention operations in these proposed 34 facilities, government-run facilities. And this presents more strategic choke points that the far left could target and the anti-organized resistance could target with direct action demonstrations. And then finally, last week, there was a presentation at the People's Forum by Center on Conscience and War Executive Director Michael Prisner. And he said more military service members getting involved in anti-war activism, these are active duty military service members, Prisner said, are openly identifying as far left. And he said, I think he said specifically, they are openly identifying as Marxist-Leninist. And he said military service members that he meets who are getting involved in radical political organizing are predominantly young officers now. He said the past 5 years is unlike anything he has experienced in the 15 years before that. So we are seeing an increase in radical politics activity within the active duty military, at least according to Prisner, who is actively organizing that. And it is, at least in Prisner's experience, predominantly far left. All right, we're going to move on to the global SITREP. Jared, if you come on and take us through the global SITREP, please.
Absolutely. We're going to start off with the America's Counter Cartel Coalition, and that's America's plural, not America's possessive. Trump administration has been very careful to note that. So this was launched by the Trump administration in coordination with 17 Latin American nations over the weekend, and it's explicitly military in nature and will work to, quoting, deprive these nations of these organizations of any control of territory and access to financing or resources necessary to conduct their campaigns of violence. Specifically, this is to eradicate the cartels. That is the mission. Much of this is basically a reiteration and formalization of the Counter Cartels conference that we covered on Friday. But there was one other interesting note here. President Trump, in his remarks, actually declared Mexico to be the epicenter of cartel violence. Now, I do think that him declaring Mexico to be the epicenter of cartel violence while establishing a military coalition to eradicate cartels suggests there is a long-term plan to address specifically the Mexican cartel issue, despite their absence from the coalition. And on that note, there were quite a few absences. Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, Nicaragua, and Venezuela were not represented in the coalition. And I think they're likely to continue to be subject to economic coercion by the United States until they specifically address their cartel issue and eventually hop onto the cartel eradication mission. Venezuela is the one likely exception to this, as they just achieved diplomatic recognition with the U.S. and may come further on side. Moving over to the Middle East, just a couple of quick notes here. The Ayatollah's successor was announced over the weekend. He is believed to be largely or partially responsible for the repression of the protests, which kicked off a lot of this, and served with the Revolutionary Guard Corps and is already sanctioned in the West. Based on Trump's previous comments, I frankly don't expect him to last very long. And lastly, the U.S. is changing its force posture a little bit over in the Middle East. The Forward Carrier Strike Group is reportedly transiting the Red Sea right now, presumably en route to the rest of the force over in the North Arabian Sea. And the George H.W. Bush Carrier Strike Group just finished up its pre-deployment exercises, so they should be deploying here soon. Now, normally there is a 2 to 4 week period between that exercise and the formal deployment. I don't think that's going to extend, certainly not to the 4 weeks. But overall, I do think that for a brief period, we're going to see 3 carriers in the area at the end of March or early April. And once the Bush is on station, there is a possibility that the administration decides to maintain the 3 carrier strike groups beyond the normal turnover period, just to maintain an increased operational tempo against Iran.
All right, thank you for that, Jared. Let's move on to questions and answers. If you could pull up our first question for us, please. From Lord of the Ree, I heard they didn't have the extra people and resources to do military escorts. Have you seen anything that would debunk that?
Yeah, so I was doing a quick ship count, just make sure I've got my numbers right. There are 14 ships that we know their whereabouts, and there are at least 3 U.S. Navy ships, along with a U.S. Coast Guard contingent that I just don't remember how many there are off the top of my head, all present in the region. Or actually, we could pull this right back up. The map you see here helps with that. There are 14 ships, and that's not counting what's over in the Red Sea, on station. The destroyers that are available for escorts are not going to be the air defense commander. So you're looking at realistically 12 of the 14 ships that are there available to be escort duty or to take on escort duties. Frankly, I do think that's enough. It's not. It is very difficult for the ships to conduct straight transits like that, but it is possible, and you can actually have a decent rotation there. I think this is particularly doable as the U.S. transitions from a long-range precision strike mode of operation into the air dominance and dumb bombing runs that the administration said they were going to start last week. That frees up destroyer escorts.
All right. Well, if you can pull up our next question, please, Jared. From Bad Wabbit, I've seen more advertisements encouraging rank and file to disobey lawful orders, offering legal advice and help. I do remember back in the 60s, men leaving for Canada to get out of military service. Isn't this current advertising facilitating a crime? I don't think so. I think they've actually been very careful. These different groups, different legal groups have been very careful to stay on the lawful side, the First Amendment protected speech side of the line here. From looking through these different websites from these different legal groups that have popped up, including that former JAG group that appeared out of nowhere, I think middle of last year. They aren't telling sort of active duty service members to disobey orders. They're basically saying contact us for legal assistance, which is entirely legal for them to do. It is legal for an active duty service member to, if they believe they've received an unlawful order, to contact legal representation and ask about it, like JAG or a private lawyer. And that this was also at the center of that unlawful orders video. Like we know what Alyssa Slotkin and Mark Kelly meant when they said you have you can disobey unlawful orders. There's a subtext there, but you can't convict someone on subtext. So they've been very careful about straddling that line. Next question, please. From Griseo Nemo, are we going to see another spike in ammo prices? Well, I've already seen locally some price increases, but yeah, I think it was last year or late 2024. When China stopped the export of gun cotton and there was the antimony export restrictions happening, that there were fears of ammo price increases. But right now, that was, I think, a longer term problem. And we might be seeing that now. I just anecdotally, I have seen slight increase in prices locally. Next question, please. From Bad Wabbit, Mamdani is, quote, blaming the white guys for the Islamic bombing, stating it was their fault for radicalizing the bomb makers. This isn't going to fly, is it? And he also placed Islamic prayer rugs at the 9/11 memorial. New Yorkers aren't going to put up with this, are they? Frankly, I think they are. And I think it is going to fly primarily because it looks bad for New York Democrats and the Democratic Party that there was regardless of what you think about Lang, this was his protest, Jake Lang. Most people aren't paying it. I think most conservative people that aren't news junkies or constantly paying attention to politics are probably not going to hear about it, or about the dynamics of what happened. And Democrats aren't going to want to promote it, so they're not going to talk about it. I expect that most people are going to forget about it in a couple of weeks, as far as the details of it. This was a protest put on by Jake Lang, and the counter two guys at the counter protest threw bombs at the protesters. And I don't think it's in the interests of New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani or New York Democrats to really talk about this beyond what they have to through the FBI GTTF investigation, frankly. Next question, please, Jared. Carl M. Any thoughts on Cotter declaring force majeure and canceling LNG contracts?
Yeah, I think the most important follow-on effect to this is what this does to China. We've seen China gets about a third of its LNG from the Middle East. Losing these contracts is going to hurt them, and we've seen a few different indicators that they are facing an imminent energy crisis. It does remain to be seen whether or not the lack of military activity is part of that, but at the very least, their industry and their ability to actually heat their homes is under threat. That makes up an enormous portion of what they actually use liquid natural gas for, which in turn obviously threatens their economy.
All right. Next question, please, Jared. Kamenai's son, his dad, wife, son have all been killed by our bombs missiles. In my own opinion, there's no way that guy will ever seek to have peace with the U.S. In light of basically his whole family being killed in bombings by the U.S., do you believe he will seek peace with the U.S.?
I don't think so. And if I remember right, Trump saying that, yeah, whoever follows Khomeini Sr. Better not continue the policies, and Khomeini Jr. is expected to continue the policies. That's why, frankly, I think that the U.S. is just going to put a missile in his living room.
Yeah, I mean, this was a risk that Trump even openly said. I think last week was right now. It looks like the strategy is kill the leaders until one leader pops up that's willing to make a deal.
Yeah,
and he even acknowledged that risk that they're going to kill the next guy, and the guy after him is not going to want to make a deal, and they have to kill him, and the next guy is not going to want to make a deal. So yeah, I think likely there are going to be some domestic incentives for some of whoever's popping up, whatever faction. Some of them are going to have domestic incentives to continue the fight. I think that's very strongly on the religious side of the government, the IRGC, especially like anybody that pops up from the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, to take a leadership position, is going to be incentivized to fight. And I think the longer this goes on, the more leaders are killed, and the more leaders have to rise up from lower levels of the religious side of the government. There's going to be, I think, an increased incentive to continue fighting, because there's a lot of talk about foreign influence in Iran on the protests and all that, but I think there is a genuine unrest, especially toward the religious half of the government. And they have been, like, some parts of the IRGC, like the Basij, which is effectively like Iran's National Guard, the religious side of the government's National Guard rolled into like a kind of quasi-secret police. Those are the guys, when you hear about protesters and political dissidents in Iran getting beaten or murdered, very often it is the besiege. It is members of the besiege because they are. It's a very large organization because it's a patronage network in a sense. Like in order to get favorable favorable chance at education and money, you join the besiege. Those guys are going to be targeted. I saw there was someone talking about on Telegram, members of the besiege were receiving anonymous messages from people saying, like, we're surveilling, we're going to get you. I am not surprised by that at all. Because if there is someone who rises up in Iran, one faction or the other that does make a deal, and it is not they are not a group aligned with the IRGC and the besiege, those guys are in major trouble. I think that's going to incentivize them to continue fighting and basically until the last man. All right, next question, please, Jared. From Ben T, using the leftist blocking of ICE warehouses as a template, could the right similarly block the construction of things like mosques, or the political levers of power aligned only with leftist thuggery? Well, the big problem immediately I see with this plan is you are getting on the wrong side of the First Amendment. And you're going, I think the risk here would be getting charged with something like conspiracy against rights. And it is a power imbalance as far as how the left and right can pull the levers of power in the United States. Frankly, the judiciary is going to align a lot more with punishing right-wing activists who try to disrupt the construction of mosques than they are going to punish anti-ICE organized resistance members who conduct a direct action demonstration at an ICE warehouse. Now, arson, that's another question. But some of these other tactics we've seen, like in Minneapolis, where the organized resistance uses direct action demonstrations to conduct these road blockades around the Whipple Federal Building or even within Minneapolis itself. Part of the problem is these guys are doing things that straddle that line of legality often. And they do get on the other side of that sometimes. And we have seen there was something that DHS claimed like 160 arrests in Minneapolis for violating 18 U.S. Code 111. That's the interfering and impeding a federal officer statute. The problem is when they go to trial, and sometimes these get downgraded to like state charges or whatever. Sometimes they go to trial and they win because they have a friendly jury or judge, or the charges are dropped just because it would be a long involved legal fight for the Trump administration to put a lot of resources into getting one demonstrator put in prison where really, frankly, they've been punished by the process. I do think in the larger picture, it's very difficult for conservative or right-wing activists to adopt the same tactics as progressives, for the far left, because there's a different legal environment you're facing. Two, the conservative or right-wing activist goals don't really align with the tactics that liberals, progressives, and far left implement. But just frankly, if you're a conservative or right-wing activist, you want stability politically. You don't want to disrupt authority, and that is to the advantage of liberals, the progressives, and far left. With the tactics they use is that they gain some advantage from disrupting authority, so they can it's not just a matter of what they can get away with, it's that their tactics are adapted to their goals. So you need to find other tactics, other strategies. One of them, just for a quick example, would be organizing at the local level to start taking over city councils and county boards, or other types of local government actions, like organizing at the local level politically to win, rather than thinking about conducting direct action demonstrations or direct actions to meet your goals, because you're going to be punished more, and two, it just isn't likely to fit what your goal is. All right, next question, please. From Dan in Texas, is Epic Fury complete without engineers collapsing and running caves, munitions factories, and specialists recovering fissile material, i.e. ground forces? You're muted, Jared.
Sorry, Mondays. I think you get pretty close, but I think you're right. You're right on the money. Yeah, there are going to need to be ground forces. The question there is whether or not they have to be American. If the U.S. can if the U.S. can find somebody that is willing to actually step up and take some military force inside of Iran without having to commit American boots, i.e., if they were to have a secular Iranian government, uh, that would allow the completion of the ground mission without the use of American ground troops. And I am still monitoring the deployment of forces around. I haven't seen any U.S. ground troops move into the region beyond artillery. There was HIMARS and Prism shooters moved in, which was pretty cool.
All right. I did see a question. I can't find it now. I think it was from Red Flyer Media. Why would leftists join the military?
Yeah.
Well, if you're a militant far left person, yeah, why would anyone join the military and be far left? Well, one, you get training. It's free training. Whether it's you're joining combat arms, which I think is probably less likely than joining a combat support or service support MOS, but you're getting experience in organizing people, especially if you are in long enough to become an NCO or you're commissioning as an officer. That is direct training for organizing. So that's one reason why they would join. The other reason is to organize within the military. So that was something that happened. If you want to look at a great example of that, the Russian Revolution. There were in that case, the Navy, not to be biased here, but the Navy was actually much more open and vulnerable to radical political organization, the Russian Navy at that time. And they were the center of a lot of the Bolshevik organizing of basically workers groups within the military. That's the two big reasons why somebody far left would join ideologically. One, they're getting direct experience in organizing people, and two, there is a history of far left looking at military organizations and taking them over through the organization of committees, workers' committees within the military. I'm sure there are some obstacles there in the U.S. for the far left doing that in the U.S. military, but that I would think that would be one of the major reasons the far left would want to join, because the more people you get sympathetic to your politics into an organization, the more influence you have over it. All right, next question, please, Jared. From Darren Miller, why would we give Iran back if someone wins a war? Don't they get the land? You're muted, Jared.
Sorry. That I think is. I don't think it's reading the situation right. The U.S. as the hegemon still somewhat retains its legitimacy from the old world order, well, the post-war order. To that extent, that means not seizing land. That does rub a lot of people the wrong way, particularly the U.S.'s allies. That's why they're so incensed, particularly in Europe, about Russia and Ukraine, as Russia did seize territory. That said, the U.S. does, in a sort of de facto sense, do that by having amenable governments. You look at Japan. We don't own Japan, but Japan is extremely aligned and allied with the United States in a way that if you told somebody that, less than 100 years ago, they would think you were crazy.
Well, yeah, this is despite that we are moving, and the Trump administration has recognized this, that we're moving to an older form of geopolitics. The post-World War II order still has a strong pull, and is part of the post-World War II order is the idea that offensive war is illegal. And by that, it's a war that's launched against another country, and you take territory. That was like the central justification for the first Gulf War, that Saddam Hussein took Kuwait. This was an offensive war aligned with historical, attitudes on that, at least post-World War II historical attitudes. So I think there's still a strong pull of that from that. I don't expect the United States, the Trump administration at least, maybe give it another couple decades before a U.S. administration just outright takes some land. But at least in the near term, I don't think that's likely because of that strong norm pull from the post World War II order saying that illegal war is, or no, sorry, offensive war is illegal, and it's really a norm, and it does have a strong pull.
That it did also get a fair what that would look like in practice as well is also an occupation, and that does not fly with basically GWAT vets. After 20 years of occupying Iraq, nobody in the administration wants to do that, and they've been very open about that.
Yeah, it also is determined by what do you mean by occupying land, by taking land. Like, do you mean the sense of like clearing it off of both in like people and occupying it with colonists, or do you mean just basically bringing it under your influence? And if you're talking about bringing it under your influence and maintaining local government, which has a lot of historical analogs, yeah, the U.S. alliance system is effectively that.
Yeah.
All right, next question, please, Jared.
All right. We are actually all caught up.
All right, well, we'll give you guys a couple more seconds to get your questions in. I did see a comment from Durgan 5668. Fertilizer prices will spike if the Middle East can't get natural gas moving. Yeah, that we talked about that last week. That's one of the. I posted the article that Michael Every shared on the global chat on the website, on the old website, and that's one of the points this article makes, is that there are some second and third order effects that will come for if the Strait of Hormuz continues to be disrupted, that people that don't immediately come to the forefront for most people. Fertilizer is one of those downstream effects of energy disruption, of oil and natural gas disruption. That does, I think, Jared, you even talked about this, that there is a potential for in the long run, if this disruption continues in the long run, a potential for famine in the region.
Yeah, that's something tons of people have brought up, is that Iran does provide a fair amount of food, and that may be so. I do think that there are quite a few people on the other side that are breadbaskets themselves, not the least of which being the United States, that could provide food aid to help mitigate that, though.
Well, and speaking on fertilizer prices, though, this could have global disruptions as well. If you're talking downstream, like even here in the United States, we've had issues with increasing fertilizer prices. We just talked about last week, the DOJ apparently launched an antitrust investigation into fertilizer producers here in the United States and importers. So there are going to be many downstream effects of the closing of the Strait of Hormuz. If reinsurance plan can't get things moving, if the Trump administration is still fighting the Iranian regime in a few weeks, there are going to be some of these downstream effects, I think.
Yeah. For what it's worth, and as a point of early warning, I do expect this war with Iran to last another probably 3 to 4 weeks. Just by the time that they get the Bush carrier over there, and I do expect it to go over there, you are looking at that kind of timeline. We're probably looking at April or May by the time this finishes up.
All right. Let's see. Well, sorry, go ahead, Jared.
There's one comment here. I'm not sure if this was over the weekend or just this morning.
Yeah, I'll look into that. I'm not sure if that's talking about I know last month there was a guy who tried to burn down the DHS office building. I want to say it was in Idaho, but yeah, I'll check into that after the show. All right. And then I see another comment from Binti. That's commitment. The left is simply more politically motivated than the right. Well, I talked about this before. I have this hypothesis. I call it anxiety politics. Basically, in the United States and the West in general, the left, and this is not just the far left, this includes the centrist, progressive, democratic, socialist, and the far left, they are able to mobilize more effectively because of anxiety politics. To the left side of the political spectrum, I think they are very effective at convincing everyone who's politically activated that something happening on the direct opposite side of the country in a small town is the most important thing right now, if it is hampering the progressive liberal political project. There's a lot more difficulty doing that on the right side of the political spectrum in the West because the normal conservative or somebody who is even kind of flirting with right-wing politics, they will look at something happening in a suburb of Seattle and say, well, that in the, you know, these in this person lives in Homestead, Florida. This doesn't affect my personal life. Why do I care? I only care about what happens locally. That is a major disadvantage to political organizing. But in a way, if you can, because I saw another comment from Bad Wabbit. Okay, but we have a group waging war against us through migration, theft, collusion, and more. We're just retaliating to that. Well, the retaliation that is going to be, I think, the most effective is going to be organizing politically at the local level, because that is, in many ways, that's what the progressive, democratic, socialist, and far left parts of the country are doing. They are organizing at the local level. We've covered it many times. The Democratic Socialists of America, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, they are running candidates in city council races. They are building influence at the local level. That's why they are able to get enough influence over the Broadview, Illinois city council, or the North Chicago city council, to get these ordinances passed banning ICE from using city property to stage for operations, or banning police from wearing masks, or at least pressuring the Minneapolis or St. Paul City Council to put a pause on liquor licenses for hotels that rent rooms to DHS agents. A lot of this is built through local politics, and I think that's likely the answer that the conservative and right in the United States is going to have to use. That's the answer for political organizing. Is there's so much focus on national level politics, but really, to get to that level, you have to start building at the local and state level. And the DSA, PSL, the Democratic parts of the Democratic Party, they have been successful doing that, and that's a model for responding, frankly. All right, did we have any more questions come in, Jared?
Yeah, 2 more came in from Rumble. Hey, don't forget, we are streaming over on Rumble too. First, does the U.S. manufacture its own fertilizer, or do we import from the Middle East?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Does the U.S. manufacture its own fertilizer, or do we import from the Middle East?
We do have some of our own domestic fertilizer manufacturing, but we do import. One of the biggest importers is actually in Canada. I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head with how they source. I know that they do manufacture some in Canada, but yeah, I don't think we import a significant amount from the Middle East, but that's not the problem. The problem is that these energy products coming out of the Gulf that do end up working their way into the supply chain for manufacturing fertilizer. That's what we're talking about when we say downstream effects, is that if the price of energy increases, then likely the price of the derivatives from refining that go into fertilizer are going to increase. And we've already seen major fertilizer price increases since 2021.
All right. Second question. Will delivering food to the Middle East affect food prices domestically? Yes. If we provide humanitarian aid, that is taking some of the food we produce here and sending it there.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
All right. From the mad scientist, what are the details on the new website? It feels like less and less information discussed here is available, or at least easy to find on the current site. There is a link posted to sign up for the beta site. Jared, I think you said last week we're still in the process of moving everybody over.
Yeah. Mike, I will double check. I know he put out a date for our prospective launch date. I'll double check to see what that was. It was very soon.
All right, and then in the meantime, we are still posting our daily watch for posts over on the old website.
Yep. And the report goes up every single day, so expect that to stay there. All right, we're all cut up.
All right, well, if that's the end of questions for today, that will be the end of our show. We'll be back with you in your inbox on the show tomorrow at 08 Central. Have a good rest of your day and stay out front.